John Salustri, and welcome to SIOR and their full world conference here at the Palmer House. I'm really happy to have as my guest, reading from my immediate left out, Richard Sleasman of CBRE, Geoffrey Kasselman of Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, and Jon Reno of Hager in LA. Gentlemen, thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
I'm always afraid I'm going to stop a name short whenever I say Newmark Grubb Knight Frank. Let's start.
Are we, by the way.
Yes. Jeff, let's start with you, since you're the gentleman here who has the national perspective. If you had to boil everything that's happening now around the country down to one industrial headline, what would it be?
Well, it would either be en fuego or still en fuego.
Okay, explain.
Well, while different markets around the country are in different places in their respective market cycles, almost every market I can think of is somewhere near that hot level of the cycle. A little bit past it, just finally getting to it, but there.
Okay. Thank you. Rich, what are you seeing in Albany?
Well, as I sit here with these gentlemen from LA and Chicago and throw Albany in the mix, obviously we're a very different size market,
right,
and different impacts in a market like ours, which is secondary by definition. I think what we see in Albany, like a lot of markets in the Northeast, is that we're following the trends you see in the larger markets, just lagging behind by 6-8 months those larger markets. In Albany, for example, now our vacancy rate is about 7% for Class A space, and so for the last 5 or 6 years, build-to-suits, speculative building wasn't happening.
Right.
Over the last 6 months of this year, we've had several build-to-suits that we've been involved with in the marketplace. And in Albany, a large deal is 100,000 square feet. Right? Unlike maybe LA and Chicago, where 500,000, 400,000 feet is a larger transaction. In those areas, we're seeing right now 3 or 4 of those under construction, which for us is highly extraordinary and a good sign of the fact that the market has turned around. It's caught up to you guys, right? And we're also en fuego now in Albany as well.
Is it an end-of-line market mostly?
It's not really end of line because those who are going to larger markets are going there for a destination reason, and they're distributing to a larger circle out of that marketplace. Right. They're also going near the port cities. They're going near larger markets for servicing them. Typically, like in Albany, we're the secondary markets. You're setting up the hubs, and out of Albany, you're working up to Montreal, over to Boston, down to New York, and out to Buffalo.
Right.
Whereas in Jersey, you're covering the entire Northeast and south towards the Mid-Atlantic areas.
Right.
So it's a different focus area geographically.
Right. Thank you. What about LA? You were a little bit ahead of the curve.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, we, in terms of peak pricing, we peaked peak pricing back in January 2014. The biggest headline I'd say, which is probably indicative of across the country, is lack of product. Lack of product.
Right.
We're starved for it right now. In Los Angeles, we've got it's a 1.4 billion square foot market of inventory. We're not a big box market. We're not like the IE. It's depending on which submarket you go to, we're at 1 to 1.5% of vacancy rate. If you look at lease rates right now, the rolling 12-month average lease rates are about 68 cents per square foot gross. The rolling 12-month average on sale prices is $128 a foot. That's buildings over 10,000 square feet. Again, going back to, we're not a big box market. At 1.4 billion square feet of space, the average building size in our market is 44,000 square feet.
Right. Jeff, when we were talking before, you introduced me to a phrase I hadn't heard before, IIoT. Explain.
Well, there's IoT, Internet of Things, and then there's IIoT, Industrial Internet of Things. And IIoT really refers to a networked factory or a networked warehouse where all the devices, anything with an on-off switch, from robotics to phones to everything in between, is networkable through the internet and can connect and communicate in real time, creating an immense amount of new data, hyper efficiencies, cost savings, right sizing, liability concerns, cyber security. I mean, there's good and bad to it, but the whole world is beginning to ponder what will be different for me and where I play in my marketplace when IoT or IIoT takes over my life, which is an inevitability. It's not even a question of if, it's a when.
Along that timeline, where are we now, generally speaking? And are there markets that you're finding are farther ahead than others?
Well, all the multinationals and the biggest firms and the biggest consultancies are spending an immense amount of time and thought and resource to be with the curve. I'd even like to say ahead of the curve, but it's probably just with the curve.
Okay.
It's widely predicted that by 2020, which is less than 5 years from now, there will be 50 billion, with a B, 50 billion devices connected to the internet and networked together, which means anybody signing a 10-year lease right now, anybody buying a building right now is going to have to deal with this before the end of that lease occurs, which means you should really be contemplating it right now, which means in theory, the advisors should be in a position to advise
Rich,
on the topic.
You're nodding your head. What are you seeing?
Again, what we see typically with these big users coming into the market in our area is that they're already coming in with these technologies in place and they're plug and playing in our market because they've tested them all out in the bigger markets already ahead of time. So and our challenge is that a lot of the inventory in a market like Albany is older, tired inventory, lower ceilings, less amenities you'd find in newer market with newer products. So our challenge is adapting the older buildings for the technology of today, and it's very challenging.
Right.
So that's probably our biggest challenge.
Interesting. What about in LA?
Yeah, certainly it's look, we're a goods movement market. The ports, we certainly benefit from the ports, and we're seeing a shift. E-commerce has been kind of the sexy word over the last couple of years. But, there it truly is, I'm seeing that move and push towards efficiency units, 40 to 50,000 square feet. It's e-commerce or subscription-based movement of goods. Clothing apparel companies have these subscription-based platforms where you order, they send you clothes once a month, and it's delivery of goods, and it's all gearing towards that same-day delivery service.
Right.
That's inevitable, like Jeff was touching on right now, and that's all going to come from technology and getting that product to the consumer, on that same-day service.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for the time. It was a
Pleasure.
really enjoyable conversation.
Appreciate the opportunity.
A lot of good information. And I want to thank you for joining us on Globe Street TV.